Welcome back to Kings of the North, your very professional college football show. I am your co-host, Doug Lesmerises, and I am joined by the great Bill Landis, and we are here to talk reasonably about college football, Bill, because I got to look at myself from Saturday night, and I don't know if I liked what I saw.
I was wondering what's up with the sport coat. This is a new Doug.
I feel I need to react, I think, to how loose I get on Saturday. I'm going to try to bring it back just as hard on Mondays. I do feel like based off of smoking fake cigarettes, waving two swords, and basically challenging all of the South to a fight that I should be wearing a tuxedo today.
I think you should wear a tuxedo and then do all those things you just said.
I don't know. I feel like a different person. That actually is probably the real me, right? This is like one of those Edward Norton things where it's like, well, which is the real one? It's like, well, the backwards hat is triggering for me, and it brings out a different Doug. But I think that's the real Doug. But now I want to be Monday Doug. So I'm going to be Monday Doug, and we'll talk professionally about the undefeated teams in the North. All the undefeated teams are up here. There are 7 undefeated Power 4 teams, and 6 of them are in the North.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome. So we're going to talk about them, but Bill, we're going to use records to go through all 28 teams. So if you didn't watch on Saturday night, we hit it pretty hard. We went for almost 2 hours getting into almost every game. So this is not going to be as game centric as Monday often is. We're trying to maybe reset everybody based on their record with how they got here and where they're going, right?
Yeah, and it was an interesting exercise, I think, to go through all these teams, because even the one, like, there's very obvious ones who are doing well and we're excited about, but even some of the teams that aren't maybe as front of mind for a lot of people have put together like kind of compelling resumes to this point and actually have have something ahead of them that is at least interesting. Whether or not we think that's attainable, I guess we'll discuss. But I did enjoy going through all 28 teams this way.
Yeah. My daughter from France is in the YouTube chat. Hello to my daughter who's in France.
Bonjour.
Who is just like doing everything she possibly can to stay up with college football while she's traipsing through the countryside of France. This is a joke. I can't do this.
Someone texted me on Sunday and said, is Doug serious? I said,
this isn't me.
He's very serious. I said, don't be distracted by the packaging. The man doesn't say anything he doesn't believe.
Oh yeah. No, I have never in my career said something I don't believe. I swear to God. Why would you do it? I've said things that are wrong. I've said things that are stupid, but I am truly wrong and truly stupid. And I'm just amped up, right? Yeah. But I actually think the South can cram it. And I actually dislike Kirby Smart as a coach, and I think as a human being. So sometimes you say it with the sports coat on and sometimes you don't. But that's where we are. No, you know that about me, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not secretly sitting here thinking like, man, I really do think the SEC should get 5 in the playoff. Please don't think that. That's the thing I accuse. It really fires me up when people accuse me of something like that. Please accuse me of being wrong and stupid. That is, I don't have a defense for wrong and stupid, but to act like I'm saying something that's not what I believe. Oh my God, that drives me crazy. Why would you do that? What is the point of that? We get in enough trouble, Landis, for the stuff we actually think. Why would we get in trouble for stuff we don't think?
I've never done that either, because it just feels like a waste of time. I likewise have been wrong plenty of times, and I'm also stupid at plenty of times. But when I say things, I say it because I believe it.
Yeah. So, and if people don't like it, that's fine. Then we just go, we move on to the next thing. Let's move on to this thing now before we're going to dive into our undefeated teams. Then we'll go through like the 1-loss teams, the 2-loss teams, the 3-loss teams, and the teams with losing records, which of our 28 Northern teams, there are not that many, Bill, with losing records. And again, this is a point I think you and I probably at some point need to talk about what Dan Wetzel and I talked about the other week, which is like Dan Wetzel saying people want these lousy games. You want to buy games in your non-conference where you're paying somebody to come to your home stadium and so you can kick their butt, so you can have a winning record, so you can feel good on a couple couple Saturdays where I was really on a kick, I think, for a while this year about like, man, let's play great games. Let's play the great games. And it's like, do you actually want that? And here we are with, I think it's 24 of our 28 teams with winning records. And it's like, oh, well, there's some stuff baked into that makes you feel good because you got to have some teams you can beat.
Yeah, winning's fun. I certainly agree with that sentiment. And you gotta fudge your way there sometimes with your schedule. So it's a balance.
Yeah. I think we literally have 4 losing teams. Purdue, Kansas, Northwestern, and West Virginia are literally the only 4 of our 28 teams that don't have a winning record as we sit here. I think that's right. Right?
That sounds right. Yeah.
That sounds right. All right, let's talk about this real quick. We're going to do our Utah bit now. We're going to start with the undefeated teams, but Utah offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig resigned. And this is fascinating, Bill, because after the Utah offense has imploded, mostly because of the health of Cam Rising and their inability to really get Isaac Wilson as a young, true freshman backup quarterback really locked in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little bit surprised after the game on Saturday, they lost to TCU late night Saturday, that Kyle Whittingham said, we're going to look at everything on the offense. Because Andy Ludwig, 2 years ago, was the leading candidate to be the Notre Dame offensive coordinator. And there was a whole discussion about Notre Dame wouldn't pay his Utah buyout. And that's maybe the only reason he didn't take that job. And then he wound up staying at Utah and was saying things like, I'm going to finish my career here. And then Kyle Whittingham was like, yeah, you are. So Kyle Whittingham was incredibly indecisive with how he handled the Cam Rising injury thing. And then a week later, we're here with his longtime offensive coordinator. I guess I like bold moves by head coaches, Bill, but I'm also a little surprised and maybe a little confused.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on it as well, because it does feel bold and a little I think from my perspective, a little bit knee-jerk just based off the circumstances surrounding Utah's offense. But also, they were getting booed off the field against TCU, and I think Utah fans have won it.
Yeah.
I think they've won it someone's head, so it might as well be Andy Ludwig's for the way that this season has gone, because it's not going to be Kyle Whittingham's. So I don't know that there's a fan base that's terribly upset with this decision. But I think maybe from our perspective, it is a little odd, because yes, Utah's offense has been bad the last 2 years, but it has been largely without Cam Rising. And last year was without Cam Rising and Brant Keithy, who were their 2 best offensive players, right? So maybe this will ignite a spark. They're looking for something. They're not trying to have this season get away from them entirely. But part of me also kind of feels like Kyle Whittingham's on tilt a little bit by making this move, right? And it's just a little odd to me. And honestly, I don't think any of this looks good for Kyle Whittingham. Kyle Whittingham on the heels of, I'm going to retire soon, and here's my coach in waiting replacement. I believe he said when they announced that Morgan Scalley was eventually going to take over for Kyle Whittingham, Kyle Whittingham said, the choice of whether or not I retire is more day to day than it is year to year. And it kind of looks like that, Kyle, with the way this season has gone, right? There's something out of sync with the Utes this year. Yeah. This is obviously just another kind of domino that's part of that.
Because guys get hurt. But it does feel more. It is incredibly unfortunate that Cam Rising's injury issues the last 2 seasons have kind of blown up Utah football. But we thought, we're doing the best head coaches in college football lists, and we're like, should Kyle Whittingham be 2 or 3? Right? That's where you are. And then it's just you feel like he would handle this better. And okay, they had Bryson Barnes last year, and he wasn't great, but he was okay. And then it was no, he's going to transfer because Cam Rising's going to stay. And it's okay, now our backup quarterback is a true freshman. It's just injuries happen. This didn't have to happen. So it's interesting to watch. And again, you have an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. One's the head coach in waiting. One, he's not a lifer. So it's not like Andy Ludwig's been there his whole career. He was Utah's offensive coordinator from 2005 to 2008. And then he was out and about. He was at Cal. He was at San Diego State. He was at Wisconsin. He was at Vanderbilt. Then he came back to Utah in 2019. So he has been there on round 2 for a little bit. It's just, I'm curious. What it means. I think for this year, it's okay, it's kind of a lost season again for Utah. But what does this mean to what you're saying about the future of Utah football and where Kyle Whittingham is?
Yeah, it's just they're 4-3, and certainly have like a winnable game or two left on the schedule, but like kind of not really. It's like they better beat Houston
Yeah.
to get to 5-3, and then hope it can beat UCF at the end of the year to get the bowl eligibility, because the other three games are BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State. And right now, I wouldn't pick Utah to win any of those three games. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know where Kyle Whittingham is in his own head about when he's going to retire or not, but it's going to be a little. I think it's borderline unfathomable that maybe his tenure at Utah might end with a season where Utah fails to reach bowl eligibility. Like I'm surprised we're here.
And I still think we're at a point where he controls that. It's not going to be that somebody else controls that. I think he's earned that. It's not like, hey, you're kind of on tilt. You know what? Let's end this thing. But it is interesting to watch as this season wind downs for Utah. Okay, so we jumped Utah there because they actually had news. Let's get to our undefeated teams now, Bill. We do have 6 we want to start it with off the top. And I want to start by asking this question, just as a reset for folks. If you're not aware, there are 10 remaining undefeated teams in college football. 8 are in the North, 2 are in the South. The 2 Southern teams are Miami and Liberty. And Liberty's 5-0. They had a game canceled by a hurricane. So, like, that's the last time we're going to say Miami and Liberty on this show. But look at that map, Bill. Beauty. Look at America. Look at America. This is from CFB Home. Our producer, Mike, found this. And it's just the logos on America of undefeated teams.
This is the America that I believe in right here.
Yeah.
This is what I want.
Oh, my God. How beautiful is it? You see that big swath of stuff in the South? What states are those? I think that's the state of Georgia. I think it's the state of Alabama and Louisiana and Texas and Mississippi. And you know what? There's not logos, not on this map, but we got them all in the North. It's like, again, we've talked about the latitude, right? We have, was it 38.5 degrees latitude? Like, we're drawing a line. We can just draw that line, draw the line. And also just to make sure we don't want Liberty. So Liberty is not us.
You sure don't.
That is not a part of Virginia that we don't count Virginia. So don't pretend. Liberty's trying to scooch up, right? Liberty's like, we're close to Annapolis, Maryland. Can we be in the North? It's like, no, you may not come join us. But Oregon, BYU, Iowa State, Indiana, Pitt, and Penn State in the great state of Pennsylvania, and then Army and Navy, which are both Northern. So those are the 10 undefeated teams. 8 are in the North, and it is a beautiful sight. And again, of the Power 4 teams, 6 of the 7 are in the North. So let's talk about our 6 undefeated teams, Bill. And I want to kind of talk about what's ahead for them before we dive into them. Let's talk about the games this week, just real quick. Like, are they going to keep winning? So Iowa State is off this week. Oregon's favored by 21.5 at home against Illinois. BYU's only favored by 2 on the road at UCF. Indiana's favored at home by 6.5 versus Washington without their starting quarterback. We'll get into that. Pitt is favored by 5.5 on Thursday night at home against Syracuse. We'll be at that game. And then Penn State is at Wisconsin and favored by 6.5. You start looking at it, Bill, and it's like a lot of these teams have decent paths to keep winning at least for a little while.
Yeah, I some more than others, right? Like I've loved BYU's football season, but BYU is kind of been on the razor's edge all year, right? With some of the games that it has played. It was another our Parker Fleming, who we reference quite often on the show, the net success rate. Like BYU's win against Oklahoma State was an upside down win. It was the most upside down win in college football this past week. So there's a little bit of that with BYU. I think there's a little bit of that with Pitt at times, right? Some just a bit of volatility that those teams have managed to overcome and continue to be undefeated. And then you have the Oregons and Indianas that look like pretty complete teams. But all of them do have a path, right? I'm not writing off any of them as potentially unbeaten regular season teams, because I don't think any of them play each other either, right? Like Iowa State does not play BYU.
They don't. And none of the Big Ten teams play each other.
Right.
Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana do not play each other. So here's, as try to sketch this out on look ahead lines, and there's not really many out there that I can find. I think Iowa State is going to be favored in every one of its remaining games. That is Texas Tech, at Kansas, Cincinnati, at Utah, and Kansas State. Because the 3 toughest games there are all at home, and then the road trips at Utah and at Kansas, both those teams were projected to be good and aren't. Correct. So we'll see where Kansas State is at the end of the year. Cincinnati is a very good 5-2 team. But again, do you agree with the idea that where things stand now, Iowa State might be favored in every remaining game as they are 7-0?
Yeah, I think they will be. Honestly, the only one that probably will be a close-ish line would be the Kansas State game.
Yeah.
Because even Texas Tech had been playing okay, but Texas Tech just lost to Baylor.
Lost to last place Baylor.
Yeah. So yeah,
that's
it'll be favored in all those games. Yeah.
Okay. Oregon. Illinois is a top 25 team. They're a more than 3 touchdown underdog at Oregon. Then it's at Michigan. They'll be favored in that road game. Maryland at Wisconsin, which I think probably is their toughest one left. Then a bye week, then home against Washington. They're going to be favored in every game, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I think big favorites, double-digit favorites, I would imagine, in every game.
So as much as BYU has lived on the razor's edge, they are a road favorite at UCF. Then they have an off week. Then at Utah in the Holy War. Don't you think they'll be favored in that, even though it's at Utah?
Yeah, I think so. Unless something, I think even if BYU were to lose to UCF, it'd still be favored against Utah.
Yeah. Then home against Kansas, favored. At Arizona State, favored. Home Houston, favored. I think BYU's favored in every remaining game.
I think that's right.
Okay. Indiana, home against Washington. At Michigan State, home against Michigan. Do you think they're favored home against Michigan?
Yes.
At Ohio State, home against Purdue. I think they're favored in every game except at Ohio State.
Yeah, they'll be probably a 2 touchdown to 17-ish kind of underdog, I would imagine, against Ohio State.
Penn State at Wisconsin this week, where they are a road favorite of about a touchdown. Home against Ohio State. Washington at Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland. I think Penn State will be favored in every game except Ohio State. And that game is at home. And we'll see how these two teams look this week. What do you think? I think that line might be under a touchdown, though. I think that might be like Ohio State -6.5 at Penn State, if I had to guess right now.
Yeah, that's probably my guess. Ohio State was, what, 3.5 at Oregon favorite? Or
Yeah, 3.5.
Came down. So a little more than that. I think less than a touchdown, but more than a field goal. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 3 teams we think will be favored in every game, and 2 other teams we think will be favored in every game except against Ohio State. Okay, then there's Pitt. Man, they got a road, brother. Oh, yeah. Let's hear about the Panthers. They are favored against Syracuse this week. Then they're at SMU, home Virginia, home Clemson, at Louisville, at Boston College. I think they will be underdogs at SMU, home against Clemson, and at Louisville. I think that's 3 underdog games for them.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. So when we're just like talking about this, like who can get there? You don't even have to stare at Oregon. You glance at Oregon, it's like, I don't know what's like, because they really handled their business against Purdue. I had been wary for them of these Midwest road trips, but the first one went great. Now Purdue stinks, but the first one went great, and Michigan's fallen off a cliff. So I think it's just at Wisconsin, but you'd have to feel decent about Oregon's chances of getting there, right?
I feel very good about Oregon's chances of getting there. I guess ask me again after we see Wisconsin host Penn State this weekend. But yeah, I feel pretty good about it.
And then the rest, like who else? Who would you feel the second best about finishing undefeated of Iowa State, BYU, Indiana, Pitt, and Penn State?
Probably Iowa State. I think Iowa State. Yeah.
And it's like the BYU schedule truly, right, is like they've won their toughest game. They don't have a game left that's tougher than Kansas State, and they blitzed Kansas State and blew them out. Like it is, they've just been, because here's the thing, and here's the point I want to make. They've all, except Indiana, been to the wire on this by now, right? Iowa State and BYU just had miracle comebacks this week. We'll talk about that more in a second. Oregon had to march in the final 3 minutes. That they were down to Boise in the 4th. And then they returned the kickoff for a touchdown right after Boise went ahead. So they immediately tied it. And then they had a 3-minute drive at the end of the game to kick a 25-yard field goal in the last play of the game. But they were pushed by Boise in a very real way. They had to go win that game, and they did, right?
Yep.
Penn State at USC had to march in the final 5 minutes, right, to tie that game, and then they won in overtime. Penn State had to go win that game, and they did. Pitt, Cincinnati, and West Virginia down, had to come back and win these games. Like, so sometimes I'm like, these teams aren't that good. They've had to come back and win. Everybody in the North has had to do that, except Indiana, who is just throttling people.
Yeah, even Indiana in the game where it turned the ball over 4 times, and you would think they would have had to come back from some kind of major deficit,
Right.
still won that game pretty comfortably against Maryland. It has not really been pushed. And then they had a game this week against Nebraska where we thought, "Oh, this will be the time that Indiana gets pushed."
Yeah.
And they were the least amount of push they've been all year.
But part of it is I like Eli Holstein and Pitt. They've driven to win a game. Jake Retzlaff and BYU, they've driven to win a game. Rocco Becht and Iowa State, they've driven to win a game. Drew Aller and Penn State, they've driven to win a game. Dylan Gabriel and Oregon, they've driven to win a game. And of course, beyond the Boise game, the last second win against Ohio State, where if Will Howard gets down 1 second earlier, Ohio State's going to have a chance to kick a field goal to win the game there. But I feel like Miami's been lucky, and Pitt also had in its last game. Pitt's coming off a bye, but the game before that, in the last 10 minutes, Cal scored a touchdown, went for 2 to tie, missed it, and then missed a 40-yard field goal that would have given them a lead. So like Pitt did get a lot. Pitt's 6-0. They've had 3 that went right down to the wire.
Yeah.
But I still feel like Miami's been luckier. Miami with the Cal stuff, Miami with the Virginia Tech thing that like the Hail Mary looked like it might have been caught by Virginia Tech and that would have been a win.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think I count these as luck for the Northern undefeated teams. They got pushed, but they literally, because Indiana has been a machine, these other 5 teams have marched to win in the final moments of the fourth quarter, which there is some luck involved, but I think they've all shown us something too.
I think they've all shown us something. I think maybe there were some breaks one way or the other that kind of put those teams in those situations, but then once they were in those situations, they kind of delivered, right? So I think how you end up in a tight game late certainly matters, and I think in the case of Iowa State, maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, but the quality to pull yourself out of that and get the win matters just as much, if not more, right? So I think all these teams that are unbeaten to this point in the North have earned it in very different ways, but earned it nonetheless, right? I for the ones that have gotten pushed, like I now certainly believe in their ability to keep doing it when they are in those situations, and I think a few of them are going to be with some of the schedules they have left.
Yeah. So like I think there's a decent shot that they all win. Like Iowa State's off this week, but everybody else wins. And then we're headed towards Penn State, Ohio State pretty soon. So like I just want to give a shout out to the undefeated teams. Let's dive into them a little bit more individually. Iowa State, we'll start with them. And just of note to people, if you find this kind of thing interesting, Iowa State and BYU both had unbelievable, gutsy, win the game drives this weekend, and they both won 38-35. So crazy.
I really need these teams to play in the Big 12 championship.
Oh.
For as much as I like Kansas State and Avery Johnson, and they're fun to watch too, there is just something about Iowa State and BYU that I need to see those two teams on the field together.
That we're at a point where your body is craving Rocco Becht, Jake Retzlaff.
Yes.
It's like my body needs it. America needs it. Who knew? Who knew? You know what I like though? I also want to say this in their own way. And James Franklin is probably the least of these because he's just not driven people crazy, but James Franklin's so established, right? You know what you're getting. But Andy Koltelnicki and that hire by James Franklin has kind of raised the level at Penn State. So even James Franklin, but like, give me these guys. Give me Matt Campbell at Iowa State when it matters. Give me Dan Lanning in Oregon when it matters. Give me Kalani Sitake in BYU when it matters. Give me Kurt Cignetti in Indiana when it matters. Give me Pat Narduzzi in Pitt when it matters. Like, they're not all the same. Pat Narduzzi and Kalani Sitake are not the same. Kurt Cignetti's not like anybody in America. There's one Kurt Cignetti. But can't you feel like I feel like the cultures of these teams coming through, especially in these late game heroics. And again, some of it's by being, I think Matt Campbell to some degree is being who he's always been. And I think Kalani Sitake to some degree is being who he's always been. And then you look at James Franklin and Pat Narduzzi, and they're here in part because they got out of their comfort zone and made 2 offensive coordinator hires that have revolutionized those 2 programs. And then Kurt Cignetti finally got a shot, brother. And Dan Lanning's just like probably going to be an excellent college football coach. So the South is a mess, but like this is real, right? This is real, brother. They're not faking their way through. Yeah, you got to win late, but they're not faking their way through.
I don't think they're faking their way through. I think they're very much being true to who they are. And I think Iowa State is probably like a great place to start with that conversation, because after the game, Matt Campbell's asked about, pulling out the win on the last drive. We can run through the drive and some of the plays that happened, but he was talking about the leadership and the culture of Iowa State, which I get can be like a little mundane and like a little corny at times. But he did say, when you have great leaders, powerful things can happen. And we're fortunate because our walls have it. It's in the walls at Iowa State is what Matt Campbell's talking about. Like, and I think he's right. Like they're a lot of returning production. I don't even think they're actually all that old. They just have like a lot of experience. Like Rocco Becht is going to be around there for like 3 more years. So, but the experience showed up for Iowa State after it had like done some things to nearly give that game away, right? It didn't stop the run against Central Florida as well as it needed to. It had what are effectively 2 pick sixes. One of them actually wasn't returned for a touchdown, but it was returned to the 1, and then UCF scored on the next play. So like it manufactured its own adversity. And I always like I chuckle a little bit when coaches talk about all the stuff they overcome. And it's like, well, you didn't have to do the things that put you in that position in the first place. Yeah. But nonetheless, they did get their way out of it. And I just think like, I don't know ultimately how the season's going to go for Iowa State. And then if it goes really well, how a mid-season game against UCF might ultimately be remembered. But I really do think that drive, especially because it was at home in front of the folks in Ames at the end of that game, like might have some staying power just in like Iowa State football lore moving forward, provided that this season goes the way that Iowa State hopes it does.
They took over with 1:47 left and went on an 11-play, 80-yard drive over a minute and 18 seconds to score the go-ahead touchdown with 30 seconds left. They had trailed 7-0, 21-14, 28-14 in that game, and then 35-27 they were down with 11:38 left after that pick six stuff, man. Like it looked dire, brother. Didn't it look dire? It was looking dire.
It was looking dire, and they got a little bit of a I don't want to say a break, but they were on the right side of a borderline call at the end of that game when Rocco Becht was throwing a ball to the sideline to Jaden Higgins, I believe, or maybe it was Jalen Noel. I can't remember. They're both good. It was on 3rd and 10, and like the receiver was like kind of out of bounds. I don't know that he ever actually would have caught the ball, but there was a lot of contact, and they got a defensive pass interference penalty against UCF that put the ball on the 4-yard line with basically 4 plays to go win the game. And there were 52 seconds left, so they had plenty of time to do it. So like that's a break, but Rocco Becht was also making plays, man. Like he was scrambling for stuff. There was one play where the defender had both of Rocco Becht's shoulder pads in his hands, and Rocco Becht just slipped out of it, got outside, and threw like a 26-yard pass down the field to kind of flip the field and get Iowa State in the scoring position. And we talked about it on Saturday night that if you look at Rocco Becht's final stat line, you're not going to be all that impressed. If you watch the stuff he was doing in the second half of that game after Iowa State went down 28-14, you will understand why I think Iowa State's got a little bit of magic dust on them this year, because that dude was making play after play after play to get Iowa State back in that game.
Which is exactly what Jake Retzloff did for BYU, which is why you need it in your bones.
Mm-hmm.
You need it. You need it like you need apple cider at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning. Oh, my God. It's like you're looking, I want to make a meme. It's like you with a cup of hot cider and a pumpkin loaf, and I would label the hot cider Rocco Becht, and I would label the pumpkin loaf Jake Retzloff. And this is all Bill Landis needs in the fall. Can we please give it to him? Can we please give it to him? BYU was down 35-31. They took over with 1:13 left against a bad Oklahoma State team. Again, that Garrett Rangel, who started for them because Alan Bowman had been bad, he got hurt, so they had to put Alan Bowman back in. The bane of our existence, seriously. On the list of people that we do not want to talk about, I actually don't want to talk about Kirby Smart, but he won't let me not talk about him. Kirby Smart is 1. Oklahoma State quarterback Alan Bowman is 2. And Alan Bowman hit a guy in the flat, and BYU missed a tackle for the go-ahead score with 1:13 left. And I was like, well, how is this happening? And then it's one of these things, like you watch these drives, Landis. It was a 8-play, 75-yard drive for the BYU go-ahead score. They made 3 good plays. Those 8 plays, there were 5 turd plays where it was like, well, that's an incompletion. Well, that was knocked out of the receiver's hand. Well, that was a 2-yard check down. That was nothing. But they made 3 plays. So the first one was on 4th down, And they're all Jake Retzlaff. Nothing was on time. Everything was Jake Retzlaff, like, who just looks in total control in the pocket at this point, which is the thing you want at the end of the game. These guys don't look rattled. They look like they're moving within the pocket and then doing things with their legs. First was a 4th down conversion where he had to slide out of the pocket on 4th and 6. Both guys to his left were covered. He stepped up in the pocket, then he stepped back, and then he did like a little sling to Chase Roberts, who came back to the ball like a champ and gained 7 yards on 4th and 6.5. And then he had a huge scramble. He stepped up, rolled right, and made this great cut on a linebacker or a safety or somebody. You thought he was maybe going to go out of bounds. He got an extra 21 yards out of that. So it was like a huge, almost 30-yard scramble. They spiked it at 19 seconds left, and then just like an absolutely beautiful ball. He danced in the pocket a little bit and hit Darius Lassiter. If you've watched this play, you watched this play? You said you're like half asleep.
I've seen. I was asleep and the touchdown play woke me up. Yeah.
Darius Lassiter attacked the ball. The way he came back to the ball and was like making a move, like such strong hands, secure the ball. He was already lowering his shoulder for contact as he caught the ball, broke the first tackle, dodged the second tackle, and got in the end zone. Wasn't it like, it's like teaching tape of receiver play, because it was between defenders, but he was strong hands, super physical, got his body ready, and then made plays to win the game. It was a fantastic play by Darius Lassiter. For people who haven't seen it, go watch these highlights of the Iowa State and BYU last drives. You can find them. Landis and I record every game. Even if you don't record the game, go find them online, because it's just guys balling out, man. But there was just a lot of similar stuff, I thought, between those two quarterbacks, and plays scrambling when they had to, and then pocket awareness and ripping throws.
I think it was the calmness of the quarterbacks maybe that kind of stuck out to me the most, because those are like, Rocco Becht is still young. Like, this is his 2nd year starting. Jake Retzlaff has not played a whole lot either, although I think he's a little older than Rocco Becht is. And then maybe it's a byproduct of having just played in some closer games before, but I guess I just like believe both quarterbacks were going to get it done, right?
Yeah.
Like, they had the ball in their hands, or team needed to score, and it's like, all right, they're going to score. Like, it's just kind of what they do. And I think both teams, Iowa State probably a little more than BYU, because Iowa State has more at receiver, I think, just have this ability to just like turn it on when they need to get a couple of splash plays. And it's like, there might be throughout the course of the game, like, boy, this offense is kind of boring. Boy, they're not really moving the ball all that well, or they're a little methodical. And it's like, oh, you need to go 85 yards in 6 plays in 35 seconds. We can do that too. And like, I don't know that there are a lot of teams in football that can like kind of do both. And BYU and Iowa State seem like 2 of them. And
we do love Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel.
Mm-hmm.
Darius Lassiter and Chase Roberts gave you everything you needed at receiver on that BYU drive. Like, they are both playmaking receivers, and it was just, and then Kalani Sitake comes out, and it's just like the most calm, humble guy ever, and he's talking about going dancing with his team, like, just like a lot like Matt Campbell, Kalani Sitake, of just like humble, keeping it together, culture in the walls, like, and again, at a place like that, it can be hard sometimes, where you have a bad year. Like, Matt Campbell's had years where people thought Iowa State was going to be good, and then they weren't. But like the body of work is inarguable. And Kalani Sitake, like, they did not adapt super well to the Big 12 when they got in there. But like, you see how the guy handles his business, and how can you doubt that? So it's a reminder sometimes, if you feel like you've got a guy, gosh, the stuff in the walls. I wish I had stuff in my walls. I just got swords on my walls. I actually have sword holders. I haven't put them up yet. You got to keep guys like that. And it's like, even like with Narduzzi, right? Like, Narduzzi, 10 years at Pitt, and I know people were mad about last year, but I think there's something there. And you just, when you're at all these programs, like the programs we're talking about, these undefeated teams, other than Penn State and Oregon, it's not something you can count on every year, even as the sport flattens out. So have a little patience when you think you have a guy who's got something in the walls. And I think the coaches we're talking about here do. Let's talk about Oregon. 7-0 Oregon, Bill Landis. I would maybe argue, based on what we saw from Texas and what we've seen from Georgia at other times, what we've seen from Ohio State at times, the most high level and competent team in college football. And I'm saying that because, knowing they had a real issue the first 2 weeks that they figured out, they probably should have lost to Boise, but I feel like they had concerns, they've addressed them, and now they're kind of doing their thing.
Yeah, I think I think I would agree with you, and anyone who might sort of bristle at that assertion is probably thinking about the Boise State game or even the game against Idaho, where it was very much in the balance late in that game. And my response to that and your response to that, I'm sure, would be, well, they've totally reworked their offensive line. Like it
Yeah.
is just it's a different offensive line than Oregon was playing with to start the season, and it's been really good since they made those changes. It didn't allow a sack in 4 straight games against Oregon State, UCLA, Michigan State, and Ohio State. It did give up 2 last week to Purdue, but one of them was a grounding penalty. They that was the question they had to answer, and I feel like they've answered it. And I think from a bigger perspective, the question coming into the season, at least in my mind, for an Oregon team that people were really pumping up, and I understood why they did, was whether or not Oregon was going to have the offensive and defensive line play to actually be the best team in the Big Ten. And I think Ohio State and Oregon are right there in terms of who is actually the best team in the Big Ten. But Oregon's offensive and defensive lines really showed up against Ohio State.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like it answered those questions too. And then its skill is as good as anybody in the country. I think a defense that has a lot of transfers, especially in the secondary, kind of continues to figure stuff out. It is certainly an offensive oriented team. I think that unit for Oregon is better and perhaps significantly so than its defense is, but I still think it's a complete team. And to your point, has been on a bit of an upward trajectory. There hasn't been dips, I think, in the quality of play for Oregon. It started out kind of crappy. They figured some stuff out.
Yes.
And it's kind of just been better since then.
Yeah. I sometimes I don't mean to make everything about Kirby Smart, but sometimes I can't help myself. So sometimes you would watch Kirby Smart and say, man, that guy is intense, but also what is wrong with him?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Dan Lanning might be like the younger brother that it's what if Kirby Smart was intense, but maybe 25% less crazed, right? And maybe 25% more in control of his program. And it might be what Dan Lanning looks like. Now, again, as I've said a million times, I didn't love Dan Lanning to the camera saying that Deion Sanders was about the camera last year, but it pales in comparison. He didn't shove anybody. Please don't go shove someone this week, Dan Lanning. I don't think he's a shover. Do you think Dan Lanning's a shover?
He did learn at the altar of Kirby, so we don't know. We don't know that yet.
But you take the best when you have sort of a mentor like that. You take the best and you learn from the worst. I don't think they're too chill in Oregon to shove. Oregon's not a shovey place. I haven't spent a lot of time in Oregon. It doesn't seem like a shovey place, right? So I don't think, I mean, come on. Athens, Georgia seemed like a shovey place. So I do think, but you can see it and it's not a guarantee, but I feel like people are using the word crazy and unpredictable a lot with this college football season, usually in the best sense of the word. And some people are just on tilt because there's no more undefeated teams in the SEC and they don't know what to do with themselves. So it's the world is ending. It's listen, man, we're good up here. We got it. We're fine. But starting in week 3, I think Oregon might be the most just good. We got it. And I don't know, going forward as we look ahead to the games that we talked about. And once upon a time, I was very curious about their ability to come to the Midwest 3 times and win. But what's going to stop them? Illinois at Michigan, Maryland at Wisconsin, Washington. There are not a lot of absolute gimmies in there, but what's going to derail Oregon? And it's about them, not their schedule. If anything's going to derail them or at least trip them up momentarily.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I look at that schedule and necessarily think that anything would trip them up, right? I guess at Wisconsin later in the year in mid-November, you get a little bit of weather, maybe you get a good atmosphere. Maybe that's a potential trip up spot. I don't, for as much as I like what Illinois has done this year, I really don't know that Illinois has it to make that an interesting game. And I think that the betting line kind of reflects that a little bit, right? And the Michigan game has just taken on a whole different kind of look to it with the way that Michigan's played this year. So Oregon, as you mentioned, is going to be favored. I think is going to be heavily favored in a lot of these games. And maybe that's the test for Oregon. It's how do you operate now when that is the expectation for you? Maybe but aside from that, like from a football standpoint, I don't know that I see a whole lot that should concern Oregon as it goes through the rest of the regular season.
And honestly, this stuff turns on a dime. Nobody picked Oregon to beat Ohio State except me. Nobody was picking that. Everybody was like, they just don't quite have it. And now it's like, okay, well, like, but as you go through their team, like their linebackers have played pretty well. Their defensive tackles are excellent, right? They've got some pressure off the edge against Ohio State. Even Jordan Birch has missed the last 2 games. Jabbar Muhammad leads a pretty decent secondary, right? You talked about their skill guys. Terrence Ferguson, their great tight end, is going to be out for a little bit with his appendectomy, but you talked about the other tight end that you loved on Friday night against Purdue. And it's just like, now that they got the offensive line straightened out, I don't know where the weakness on their team is really.
Yeah, I don't know that they have a glaring one. Like Ohio State threw it on them, but
yeah,
they're not going to play. We'll see, right? Illinois got good receivers and a good quarterback. If they can protect, and we'll break that down later in the week. Like Illinois has a good passing attack, and
they do.
So does Washington, right? So maybe that's where some issues can creep up for Oregon along the way. But yeah, I don't see a glaring weakness necessarily with Oregon. It is funny to me though, like we are Will Howard sliding a half a second sooner away from this being a very different conversation where like, meanwhile, Columbus is burning and everyone thinks that Oregon might be the best team in the country.
But I will say, and you and I broken down that Ohio State and Oregon game in many ways and many places. I thought it was a well-played high-level game, especially in comparison to the games that we've seen in the SEC between the supposed best teams down there. But even in breaking that down, even if Ohio State had gotten it down on the slide 2 seconds earlier and had made a 45-yard field goal to win that game, I still think you could argue that Ohio State made a few more mistakes than Oregon did in that game. I didn't feel like some of the stuff Ohio State did to Oregon was just ball. But it's not as much like, oh, look, someone got beat on a 69-yard touchdown. Or I don't know. I think it would have been, I think it's a pretty strong loss for Ohio State, obviously. Yeah. At what is currently the number 1 team in the country by a point on the road in a great environment. But even if Oregon had lost that game at home, I think they were, for instance, much more competent in that game than Texas was at home against Georgia on Saturday, right? I still think even in defeat, there would have been a lot of competence to the Ducks.
I agree with that. And I think that you and I would be talking about Oregon the same way that we're now talking about Ohio State, the team that lost that game. But I don't know if the rest of the country would because of the brands, right?
That's right.
It's an interesting, I guess, hypothetical that we don't have to deal with because Oregon won the game. But the larger point is that Oregon is very good. Oregon has done everything it has to do to be in the conversation for best team in the country.
Yeah, we agree with that. All right. Indiana. Is Indiana the most dominant team in the country? Adjusted EPA per play. This is just, again, a measure of sort of like how successful and efficient you are play to play. They're 5th in offense. They're 17th in defense. Their +7 turnover margin is tied for 13th in the country. They lead the nation in scoring, 48.7 points per game. Their defense is 7th in scoring, allowing only 13.7 points per game. So, yes, they are beating teams by an average of 35 points per game. By yards, they are 5th in total offense and 7th in total defense. And everything, they are a machine, Landis, except the quarterback hurt his thumb. So that's where we have to go with them now. We've certainly when did that news come out? I guess Sunday? When it officially came out? Yeah. So if you have not heard, you probably have by now, that Curtis Rourke, who was the second team All-North quarterback on our KOTN midseason team, has been great for them. Hurt his thumb, missed the second half of the wipeout of Nebraska, but is going to be out at least for a little bit, at least this week against Washington. But Landis, the one thing, when you go back and watch that, he didn't hit it on a helmet. He hit it on a defender's arm or wrist. And they were talking about, he played a couple games after it, and they were saying maybe the nail came off and they were trying to wrap it and stuff. Thumb injuries to quarterbacks are not great because you have to grip the ball. But as far as thumb injuries go, based on looking how it happened, you hope, and it feels like maybe it's not as bad as sometimes when guys hit it on a helmet, which happens a lot of the time. So I think there is hope for Indiana there with Rourke's prognosis.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, but I would imagine that if there's nothing structurally wrong with the bone in the thumb, then he should be okay. I've also never had a nail ripped off, and I hope that never happens to me because that sounds incredibly painful, but it seems to me like maybe a week or two that they won't be able to play, and then perhaps he'll be back. I can't imagine that's something that will keep him out for like the rest of the regular season or something. But again, I know nothing about fingernail regeneration, and I want to repeat that I'm also not a doctor.
Would you give him your nail?
It depends on how it would have to be extracted. If it has to be extracted from me in the same way that it was from him, I think probably not, because that sounds painful.
What if Curt Cignetti called and asked you personally?
Maybe. He's very persuasive.
I think if he asked.
Yeah.
I think he might start by asking, and then he might end by demanding, and then it would be like, it's like, why'd you give Curtis Rourke your nail? It's like, did I have a choice by the end?
They're not in a bad spot though, right? Like Taven Jackson, I thought played pretty well, and it was like a lopsided game already against Nebraska. But I remember thinking back to the spring game, Taven Jackson, I thought looked good. He's a guy who's played a decent amount of football. Like I don't know
last year. 5 stars in Indiana last year.
Curtis Rourke being out is a huge deal for Indiana, and obviously if it persists more than like the week or two that I think it's going to, it matters more. But I think they can be just fine with Taven Jackson, the quarterback, the next couple of weeks.
7 of 8 for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns in the second half. Now, that was with the 28-7 lead. But if it's Washington home at Michigan State, it would be awesome to have Curtis Rourke back for Michigan.
Yes.
Then they have a bye week, then they're at Ohio State. So if it had to be that you're going to let him slide, like give him a month off and get him ready for Columbus and try to beat Michigan at home, it just would be fun to have Curtis Rourke for that game. So anyway, they are dominating in every sense of the word on both sides of the ball. They are a machine. Penn State, they were off this week, but they're still undefeated, 6-0 Penn State. What do you think of them?
I think Penn State is about what you expected it to be on defense. I think if you really dig into the numbers, it's a little worse off. And by worse off, I mean it's like merely top 25 in some metrics that it was like top 5 in last year. But it's still a very good defense and an offense with Andy Koltonicki calling the shots now that has found a way to be more efficient and, while not overly explosive, I think more explosive, which is perhaps all Penn State needs to be to maybe get over the hump that people have been dying for James Franklin to get over for the last couple of years. Like I think they're balanced offense defense. I think they're decently balanced run pass. I guess the one thing is, right, like the receivers are probably not quite what people hope they would be.
Yeah.
But this has a lot of pieces, I think, of a championship caliber team. And that's even if it doesn't get past Ohio State in a couple of weeks, like everything is still there for Penn State, at least when it comes to making the college football playoff and making that kind of run. So I like where Penn State is. And maybe it's had a couple of games that make you scratch your head a little bit, right? The Bowling Green game, the UCLA game, the first half of the USC game. Like it's not been it is an imperfect football team, but when everything's really clicking, I think they're pretty good.
So we don't have to spend a ton of time on that here. We will talk about more about this Pitt-Wisconsin game coming up. It does remain, it's like, oh, Ohio State, what's Ohio State's deal? It's like, well, they lost to one undefeated team on the road, and now they have 2 more undefeated teams still on their schedules. I think we'll do conference race breakdowns maybe next week or at some point. Like the ins and outs of Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, 2 of those 4 are almost certainly going to be the 2 teams in the Big Ten championship game, and like how that shakes itself out. Pretty interesting to figure that out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's annoying to figure it out because, as we said, the only team that plays all those teams is Ohio State. The rest of them don't play each other, so it's a little bit of a cluster. It's as clean as if Ohio State wins out and Oregon wins out, that's who's going to play in the Big Ten championship. But it's possible that doesn't happen, right?
Oh, definitely.
And then if it doesn't, then if it doesn't, then we'll have a conversation. Yeah.
Last one's Pitt, and we are going to spend a lot of time on Pitt Syracuse this week on Thursday night, so we don't have to spend a ton on Pitt here coming off a bye. Both Syracuse and Pitt are off and off week going into this Thursday night game. Again, they've lived on the edge the most of the undefeated teams, and they have the most difficult schedule remaining. So they are the most precarious, but they have made winning plays, right? So like, we don't want to lose sight of that, but you also acknowledge that They were 1st and 10 at their own 20 with 2:37 left against Cincinnati and drove 9 plays, 63 yards, and 221 for the game-winning field goal. And they were 1st and 10 at their own 23 with 1:55 left and drove 6 plays, 77 yards for the game-winning touchdown with 32 seconds left against West Virginia. And then, as we said, they kind of had some help at the end against Cal. So Cade Bell, offensive coordinator, Pat Narduzzi letting it fly, Eli Holstein as a boomer bust quarterback, and Des Reed as dangerous as any running back in the country who's not named Ashton Genty. And then a pretty decent offensive line, some playmakers on the edge, and a defense is probably playing a little bit better as we go along here. Pat Narduzzi kind of asked for the defense to step up, and they did in the last game against Cal. So, Mike, they're over their preseason win total, Landis. And once you're 6-0, I don't know how much time you have, but you can see it's going to take some more magic. They probably need the most magic for this to continue. But also, are you that but I don't want to over hype a trip to SMU. It's I don't want what's for real? SMU, okay, fine, SMU. And then I don't know, is Clemson at home? They get them at home. I don't, I guess Clemson's good. But again, I'm not sure what Pitt should be afraid of, but it's going to take some magic.
Yeah, it will. I that's a pretty tough schedule. And SMU is playing. SMU stopped playing quarterback carousel and has been much better since then. So that's a tough trip too. And I think we talked about how much I believe in Jake Retzlaff and Rocco Beck to kind of get it done if they're put in that situation. I'll believe in Eli Holstein because he has done it, but boy, does he make me nervous. With some of the passing decisions that he makes and sort of lives to tell about. So you said boomer bust. I think that's right. But you also made a good point about the defense. I do think their defense has gotten much better week after week. It has done it, I guess, not playing some of the best offensive teams in the country, but they're getting a little healthier there. They're probably just more complete on defense than they were earlier in the season when I definitely had some questions about their ability to stop people. And we'll get a better idea of where that defense is this week now that they're playing Syracuse, right? So they're a fun team to watch, and I think that maybe it can be okay, right, for Pitt this year, based off how bad last year was and what the expectations were coming into this year. Pitt is 6-0 and really fun to watch, and I have no idea where it's going to go, but I'm excited to watch it play out.
Let me ask this: if we were doing a draft of our 6 Northern undefeated teams, and we were drafting skill players. And as much as we like Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins at Iowa State, and as much as Jordan James and Tez Johnson at Oregon are awesome, and as much as we just talked about Darius Lassiter and Chase Roberts at BYU, and as much as Indiana with Surratt and some of their other receivers have played pretty well, right? Justice Ellison, multiple guys in the backfield, and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen and Ty Warren at Penn State, maybe Ty Warren. But Des Reed's in contention to be the number 1 pick in the skill player draft among undefeated Northern teams. Is he not?
If we're doing just undefeated teams, yes. Yeah.
Is it so. Between Des Reed and Ty Warren? Penn State tight end Ty Warren?
Yeah.
And we just listed a bunch of other guys that are really good. So anyway, Des Reed's a baller. Top 11.5 rankings. Where our undefeated teams should fit into these rankings. Inevitably, they should be higher than they are in the actual polls. We know it. Polls are just not equipped to make reasonable, mature adult decisions. So we'll make them for them. Landis, what's your top 11.5? These are our top 11 teams. And then 11.5 is the team we got an eye on. It's kind of like playoff stuff, but we're not beholden to conferences in doing this.
Yeah. I moved Oregon to 1. I have Georgia 2. I'm excited to see where you have Georgia. I have Ohio State 3, Penn State 4. I dropped Texas, who was my number 2 team, I believe, down to number 5 after it's lost to Georgia. I moved BYU up to 6. I have Iowa State now behind BYU at 7, Indiana 8, Miami 9, Clemson 10, Pitt 11, and then my 11.5 spot is Navy, because I think Navy has the best G5 resume at the moment, and will get a chance to add to that this week when it plays Notre Dame.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk about Notre Dame Navy a lot this week too. My rankings have all the same teams, except I have Kansas State instead of Navy in my rankings. Basically the same order. Oregon 1. I do have Georgia 2 because at some point, you do have to give credit for good wins, and to go to Texas and to win in Austin is a good win for sure. I have Penn State 3, Ohio State 4, Indiana 5, Iowa State 6, BYU 7, Miami 8, Texas 9, Clemson 10. I have Kansas State 11, and then I'm checking at Pitt for my team 11.5. My question is, I don't know, again, just believing that Miami's been a little luckier. Maybe they've also come back, but just luckier than some of the undefeated teams. I'm not sure why Miami in the polls is ahead of our northern undefeated teams. And I thought Indiana was so dominant that I then jumped them in like the Indiana, Iowa State, BYU pack. I think it's reasonable. Like, you still have some talent stuff in your head. So of our 6 northern teams, Oregon and Penn State are probably going to be on top, and Pitt, because they've been living on the edge a little bit more, is probably going to be 6th. But then those other 3, I think you can go back and forth as much as you want. But I thought Indiana's dominance on Saturday was enough for me to say, okay, they're going to jump Iowa State, who I had 5th overall in my last time we did this. So I have Indiana, Iowa State, BYU in that order, but I have all of them ahead of Miami. I have all of them ahead of Texas. I have all of them ahead of Clemson, because now we're playing the game. What's Texas's best win, right? I guess it's at Michigan, but I think like Indiana dominating Nebraska, BYU, as we've said, has 2 top 25 wins. Iowa State with the winner over Iowa. And just like, I think their wins are just as good and they haven't lost.
I think BYU's SMU and Kansas State wins are going to continue to age very well. And like, I don't, Indiana has not, in my opinion, while it's been incredibly dominant and awesome, hasn't beaten a team of either of those caliber yet. So that's why I had BYU ahead of them. And then I also have Iowa State ahead of them, which maybe could be wrong. Like, if you want to use the dominance as a tiebreaker, Indiana's definitely been more dominant. I know Iowa just lost to Michigan State. I still give Iowa State a decent amount of credit for going to Iowa City and winning that game. And I think that's also maybe a slightly better win, maybe in terms of caliber of opponent, than anything that Indiana has right now. But you're splitting hairs a little bit. Whatever order you want to rank those 3, I don't think I'm going to argue.
And it's one of those, again, in the actual AP poll, Iowa State's 10, BYU's 11, and Indiana's 13. And you and I are now discussing like what order they should be in between like 5 and 9. So again, we would just invite anybody on the show to come in and explain, like, why is Tennessee ranked ahead of them? Like, you and I didn't have Tennessee anywhere on this, just because they beat Alabama. Have you watched Alabama? Did you watch that game? Tennessee that lost to Arkansas, Tennessee that barely beat Oklahoma. Like, what are we talking? You know, like, so it's, because I do, like, if you're going to give Georgia, and are you surprised that I have Georgia second?
Yeah, I thought you might have Ohio State and some of our unbeaten northern teams ahead of them still.
Yeah. So at some point, right, you have to, at some point, good wins trump bad losses for me, right? So Ohio State and Penn State don't have a win like a win at Texas.
Yeah. So
that's the thing that matters to me. But then you start playing this game. LSU in the real poll is 8th with no wins. Right. So like, that's one of those. So why? Okay. Georgia's 2 because they have the best win. Why is BYU 11 with 2 top 25 wins? So there's people aren't consistent with their line of thinking because they are stupid. Okay. When we come back, we're going to go faster. We're going to go through the losing record teams. I've seen you checking your watch. We just had such a good.
We're an hour into the show. We've talked about 6 teams.
I know. All right, we'll do 15 seconds on the remaining 22 teams in the North in 3. We'll go as fast as we possibly can. I'll just stop. I'll stop talking, and we'll just Landis run through 20 teams, and then we'll say goodnight. Next on KOTN. All right, we're back. We don't have to spend as much time on the losing records teams, though, right? So,
correct.
They don't earn as much time. We'll start with 1-6 Purdue. They got shut out by Oregon on Friday night. They did miss a 36-yard field goal, so they probably shouldn't have gotten shut out. But they also went
coward's field goal, by the way. They were down 21-0. They should have went for it.
Do you almost root for cowards field goals to miss? because you want lessons to be learned. Because coaches think I want the sure points, and the answer is there's no such thing as sure points.
Right. Not with college kickers. Yeah, and
not with college kickers.
Don't be a little chesty about your offensive prowess, Ryan Walters, the week before, and then kick a coward's field goal when you're down 21-0.
Look at you. He's grasping at straws, brother. I don't know what to tell you. So it was not good. As Bill said, it was the second game where Ryan Walters took over as play caller. They did have about 301 yards of offense against Oregon. It's not like they had 12 yards of offense, but they did go from 49 points in game one of Ryan Walters calling plays to 0. Can I just say something to you? Army coach Jeff Monken went to college at Millikan, which is 140 miles from Purdue.
Let's go. I thought Indiana should have hired Jeff Monken, and clearly Indiana got it right. So here's a chance for another Indiana program to hire Jeff Monken.
Like when we were playing Who's the Next Kurt Cignetti game. Now Army's but Army's not a power conference program,
right?
So,
also too, if you're worried about bringing in a service academy head coach because you think they only know one way to play football, look at what is happening at San Jose State, with Ken Niumatalolo. Because you're wrong.
Jeff Monken is 57, and he's been the head coach at Georgia Southern and Army. And he was 38-16 at Georgia Southern, and he's 77-55 at Army. And somebody's going to hire him. And I'm not being dismissive of Ryan Walters, but you could get a jump. I don't know. If you said right now, who'd you rather have as your head coach next year, Ryan Walters or Jeff Monken? What would you say?
Jeff Monken.
Okay. So I'm just saying. And I just like to look up things to see where people are from. I've been to Millikan University. Have you ever been there?
I have not. No.
I've been to Millikan. I went to a party there one time.
Nice.
Maybe
were you
they
smoking fake cigarettes?
I was definitely wearing a backwards hat. That I know. I always tell the story when I was visiting colleges. I went to a college and I was like, I don't want to go there. Everybody was wearing a backwards baseball cap the whole time. And I was like, backwards baseball cap is not my vibe. And then I went to college and wore a backwards baseball cap every day for 4 years. So
can I tell a story quickly while we're trying to save time about the first college party that I ever went to?
Yeah.
So I was still in high school. I was up at Penn State for a weekend, experience, see what going to college is like. Yeah. And it wasn't even my host, another kid's host, invited both of us to a party. And I was very nervous because I was a very shy kid. I was like, yeah, I'll go to my first college party. We'll see what it's like. Just fully expecting not to talk to anybody there. So we went to a house party and there were 12 people there. And it was half girls and half boys. And the girls were in the kitchen making cookies the whole time. And the boys just sat in the living room and watched Star Wars. It's is this what a college party? I soon found out that that's not what college parties are like. But that set a weird expectation for what going to parties at Penn State was going to be like.
And you said to yourself, cookies and Star Wars, I am definitely going to Penn State. They hooked you, brother.
Yeah. Yeah. It was good. It was exactly what I needed in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. I could go for some cookies and Star Wars right now. All right. Kansas, they won. They're 2-5.
They did win. Yeah, they came out of the bye week, their off week, and I think probably played the way they thought that they were going to play all year. Which is good. Jalen Daniels played clean football. He threw the ball downfield. They were pretty explosive offensively. Devin Neal ran the ball well. They got after the quarterback. The only surrender was at 14 points to Houston. It was great. Congratulations to Kansas for finding a way to play better football. Here's the problem. The rest of your schedule is Kansas State, Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, and Baylor. So I am not bullish on the Jayhawks' ability to go start rattling off some wins, but I guess it was Lance Leipold who said throughout the losing streak that they were doing the things they want to do. He believed in the way that they do things, and I guess this was validation of that on some level. But it is a lost season for the Jayhawks nonetheless.
Also, Houston stinks. So
Houston does stink. Yeah, I was trying to be nice. I didn't say that.
Yeah. Northwestern's 3-4. They are done playing on their temporary stadium on the Lakeville. I thought maybe they would have a little bit of a home field advantage there. They went 2-3.
Me too. Yeah.
They beat Miami and Eastern Illinois. They lost to Duke, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And they kind of got their doors blown off by Wisconsin last weekend. So this is how this works in sports. Zach Lujan the 29-year-old offensive coordinator at Northwestern, came from South Dakota State. And I at least saw a couple social media posts after you mentioned this on Saturday night. South Dakota State lost to North Dakota State, and they lost 13-9. And people were like, oh, I miss Zach Lujan. And Northwestern people are like, you can have him. Because they last year, Northwestern converted 41% of third downs. That was 53rd in the country. This year, Northwestern is converting 27% of third downs. That is 132nd in the country. And the only two schools that are worse on third downs offensively are Southern Miss, who just fired their coach, and Kent State, which is one of two winless teams in FBS. So that's where Northwestern is offensively right now. By the way, the two winless teams in FBS are Kent State and Kennesaw State. So if you are a state that starts with K, they're lucky there's not a Kentucky State in FBS, or they would be winless as well. So it's just like you bring in a young guy, it's a leap. He's a good offensive mind, but like it's not clicking there yet. So their offense is continuing to have some problems. They dropped a 3 there on the Badgers. So
yeah,
can they figure it out? Can they figure it out going forward?
I'll be interested to see how they recruit to it.
Maybe
and what they can bring in. Yeah.
All right. Last losing record teams: West Virginia 3-4, with their 4 losses are to the 4 best teams in college football. I think I heard that from Neil Brown.
You definitely did hear that from Neil Brown. And their 3 wins are against Albany, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. So an FCS team and 2 teams that stink. So there's 2 sides to that coin. Neil Brown.
We beat Alan Bowman.
Neil Brown, who as of this recording has not been fired. And I guess if it's a Monday, maybe he won't be. West Virginia fans are trying. There is a fireneilbrown.org that came into existence, I believe, over the weekend and last week. There was a group of West Virginia fans who raised a not insignificant sum of money to fly a banner around the stadium that said, "Are you having fun?" ? Fire Neil Brown. But that banner, I guess, was never actually flown around the stadium because I guess not enough money was raised, or like the airplane company backed out. But the guy who's trying to organize it said that have no fear, that he's going to try to get it when they play Baylor in a couple of weeks. They do not play at home. They're at Arizona, they're off, and then they're at Cincinnati. So they're going to be away from Morgantown for about a month. But assuming Neil Brown is still the coach when they come back to Morgantown to play Baylor in November, there might be an airplane flying around the stadium calling for him to be fired.
Okay. Sorry to West Virginia fans. It was an exciting home schedule. There was a lot of expectations, then it just didn't happen. All right, let's get to our 1-loss teams. Bill, everywhere on the rundown sheet, just we'll talk inside baseball a little bit here. Everywhere on the rundown sheet that says 4 minutes for segment, just pretend it says 4 seconds. Okay. Let's start with Illinois. 6-1 Illinois going to Oregon this week.
It's a really interesting spot for Illinois as a program, right? And it's not a must win. I don't think there's a ton of pressure on Brett Bielema going into this game after it's just beaten Michigan. There's a lot of goodwill there, and I think that there should be. But it's an opportunity, I think, for Illinois to show a little something about itself. And I'm just curious to see how they show up. I don't think this defense probably has it to go beat a team like that, right? It did a really nice job of shutting down Michigan's rushing attack because it's all that it had to worry about when facing Michigan. And I'm not trying to poo-poo that loss for Illinois at all. It was an awesome win for that program on a really cool day. And also, I did not know this about Brett Bielema, but he's got like some personal tragedy tied to playing against Michigan, just like some stuff in his life that's been bad has happened around the time he was either supposed to coach against or play against Michigan. So that carried like a little more like emotional burden for him too going into this week. And I feel like with everything going on, Illinois really responded and rose to the moment to beat Michigan. It was a great program win, and they're having an awesome season. I just don't think that it's in the cards to go beat Oregon. But after that, it's Minnesota, Michigan State, Rutgers, and Northwestern. I think Illinois is staring down a very reasonable 10-2 season. Yeah. It's just like, where did that come from? So it's been a great year for them.
With losses to 2 probable playoff teams in Penn State and Oregon. And I thought the Red Grange uniforms with the painted helmets to look like leather helmets, and then like the pants were the same color and the blue tops. I thought it looked even cooler than expected, and I expected it to be cool.
I thought the helmets were awesome. The uniforms took a little while to grow on me, and I know there were some people who didn't like them. I at the end of the game, and it helps that they won, I guess. I did think it was a pretty cool look.
Yeah. So, when we talked about this game on Saturday, I think we really did focus more on what Michigan didn't do, but you were correct to like make sure we emphasize what a great program win. Like it was a big deal game against a big deal, high profile opponent, and they went out and got it done.
Yeah.
So like
one bit of bad news is running back Caden Fagan is out for the year. With a hip injury. Yeah. He was out, and
they're so deep at running back.
They have other running backs. Yeah, it has not been an area of strength necessarily for their offense, but
Aiden Loffrey was running good.
He was. Well they ran it better. Yeah, they ran it better against Michigan, which was nice to see. But Caden Fagan, tough.
Yeah, that stinks. All right. Yeah. So next up is 6-1 Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is getting something together here because they are having this is where a place like Notre Dame is in a different situation than a place like Rutgers, for instance. Both of those teams are experiencing a lot of injuries on defense. So Benjamin Morrison, one of the best corners in the country, is out for the year. They're playing a true freshman named Leonard Moore in his place, and he was really good on Saturday. And they have a lot of confidence in him. They had a backup named Chance Tucker at corner who previously had knee surgery. Jaden Mickey, who probably would be starting right now, got frustrated, I guess, and went in the transfer portal. Like they've had a lot of situations at corner. And on the outside, they're playing Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, a first-year guy and a second-year guy. And they're playing at a high level, and Jordan Clark's playing pretty good in the slot. And like when, Leonard Moore's a four-star player, he was the number 38 corner in his class. He's not, he's not a top 10, but like he's a good player. And like Ben Morrison played when he was young, and there's just like a lot of stories you can find the Notre Dame saying like Ben Morrison is helping this young guy do what Ben Morrison did when he was young. And it's like, man, you'd love to hear stories like that. So they're hurt, but they're figuring it out. And then Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury at linebacker are both second-year guys. They were both top 150 recruits. They both played great on Saturday, Bill, and you've talked about a lot. We've talked a lot about the Notre Dame injuries, but they have young guys behind those hurt guys who are stepping up and are ready to play. And I think some stuff might be coming together. They got a nice win over Georgia Tech. They have 2 Service Academy games left where they are going to have to tackle like crazy and fit gaps and be solid. And maybe young guys get exposed, starting with Navy this week and then Army's in a month. But maybe their young guys are ready for this. But I think I've been legitimately impressed by the way Notre Dame has responded since the Northern Illinois loss, especially with all the injuries.
Yeah, I have been too. And I think when we've talked about Marcus Freeman and like next steps at Notre Dame and like recruiting specifically, for me, that's been much more of an offensive conversation. I think they recruit well defensively, they develop well defensively, and they're well coached defensively. So it's not a surprise to me that they've been able to kind of work around some of these injuries. Like there's a breaking point, I suppose, like how much more can you endure? But I think they've done a really nice job of that to this point. And the offense does seem to be finding a little bit more to it with the passing game. So I think Navy and Army are both going to be tests for Notre Dame, but they're definitely tests that Navy can win because Navy has more talent. And I think at least defensively, right, it's not like seeing those offenses is not something that Notre Dame is not used to. They see them every year.
Right.
So I think they'll be able to handle it, but I'm excited to watch it play out those 2 games.
Xavier Watts at safety, one of the highest graded safeties in the Power 4 by the Brian Fremo Index. They are the number 2 defense in the country, and by adjusted EPA per play, they are the number 3 defense in the country. This defense is playing great. Kansas State also 6-1, Bill.
Kansas State, I think starting to perhaps take off a little bit, right? I think that's where we are with Kansas State on both sides of the ball. Like their offense is rounding into form with Avery Johnson. DJ Giddens is great. Dylan Edwards has been more and more involved. It feels like every week they have receivers stepping up. Like there's just a lot of things to like about this team. Avery Johnson is up to number 35 in the country in EPA per dropback, which is not a bad spot for a guy to be who's still like relatively young and still very much figuring some things out. His passing efficiency has climbed every week since the loss to BYU. that comes with the caveat, I guess, that it was against Oklahoma State, Colorado, and West Virginia, 3 teams that aren't necessarily defensive juggernauts, although Colorado's defense actually isn't that bad this year. Chris Kleiman on Avery Johnson asked about how he played this past week against, I guess it was after the West Virginia game. He said, the kid's calm, he's patient, and he understands things. He's not going to get antsy in the pocket. He's staying in there, and it's fun to see, especially when we're struggling to run the ball. I just think week after week they are getting the growth they want out of Avery Johnson. And as long as that continues, Kansas State's going to be a problem.
There's young quarterbacks growing up in the North. Like it's kind of cool to see. Good quarterback play. But like, I don't think people are doing it. I mean, imagine like if they did get blitzed at BYU, if they were undefeated, I think people would be going nuts. Like they're really good.
Yeah.
And they had they got a little lucky at Tulane. Like they made their own bed in the first month, but like this is truly a program that is getting better. Ohio State, 5-1. It's all about the offensive line. Mm-hmm. You had guessed maybe Austin Sarabeld, who'd been playing guard for Ohio State, could be the left tackle answer now that Josh Simmons, their starting left tackle, is going to be out for the year. Ryan Day in the off week said it's probably going to be Zen Michalski, who was the left tackle who came in for them. Like Josh Simmons actually was not having, as you pointed out in the past, was not having a great game against Oregon before he got hurt, but otherwise have been pretty good this year. And I will say, like looking ahead for Ohio State, they have Purdue and Northwestern on the schedule, but their other 4 games, starting with Nebraska this week, they're going to play some pretty good defensive lines, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker for Nebraska, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Duran, Abdul Carter for Penn State, Kyle Kamara, James Carpenter. Like Indiana has been playing really well defensively, and that's the strength of Michigan's team is the defensive line. Josiah Sturridge playing as well as any rush end in the country. Mason Graham's a first-round pick at defensive tackle. Rayshawn Berry, Kenneth Grant, like they have Derek Moore. So this is now the biggest question mark for Ohio State is left tackle / offensive line in general. And they have defensive lines ahead that are going to push on that question mark.
Definitely. I was a little surprised that Ryan Day named Zen Michalski the starter so quickly. Not surprised. Ultimately, that's where Ohio State ended up, because that's who went to the game against Oregon after Josh Simmons was injured. And I guess all things being considered, Zen Michalski handled that pretty well in a tough spot. But it'll be stressed moving forward, starting this week against Nebraska. Nebraska is more defensive tackle oriented than it is sort of edge guy oriented, but they don't have bad edge guys, and they got good linebackers. And I bet they're going to blitz the crap out of the left side of Ohio State's offensive line to make those guys show that they can handle it. I'm interested to see how Ohio State attempts to scheme around that, because I think they'll have to. But it's a thing you circle now for Ohio State moving forward, especially with the opponents they have left. It's not the only injury. Will Kasmarek, quasi starting tight end, is going to be out for a while too. And I think it's possible they're not going to have Lathan Ransom for a little bit too.
One of their 2 starting safeties with Caleb Downs, who's coming, and he's one of the higher graded safeties in the country too, Lathan Ransom.
Yeah. So I don't know how they're going to work around that either. So there are a few spots with moving pieces, but the most important of them is certainly left tackle.
And this is what that was, injuries happen. And when you're a high level program like Ohio State, you have to have depth here. But this is the offensive line in particular. It is not, it's not funny. We don't want anybody to get hurt. We want college football players who put in work to be able to play. But if you were going to pick the 2 places on Ohio State where they maybe don't have the depth to handle injuries, is it offensive line and safety?
Those are the 2 spots in the offseason that we all talk. Offensive line way more than any other position. But if you ask people in the offseason, what's the position that number 2 on the list concerns you the most about depth, it was safety. Yeah.
Because you thought they had 2 really good guys as the starters, and then after that, you're not sure. So this is absolutely going to be tested. Syracuse 5-1, heading to Pitt on Thursday night, and we cannot wait to watch this game.
Yeah, I'm really fired up for this game. It's going to be. I'm excited to watch Kyle McCord and Eli Holstein kind of just go shot for shot here. That's really what Syracuse's season has been about, right? Like Fran Brown. I saw somebody, I think it was 24/7 Sports, had Fran Brown among the top 10 coaches who have done the best job this year, and I think that's right with the way that he's turned around the season. They're 5-1, and they should be 6-0. They lost a game to Stanford that they gave away basically. So they should be to a bad team. They should be 6-0, and they should be 3-0 in the ACC and right in the thick of the ACC race. they're on the periphery of it now, but I think some of those teams will take some losses, and Syracuse will have an opportunity to dole some of them out. They're going to play Pitt on Thursday, like we said. They're going to get Miami in the last game of the year. Miami has to come to the Dome at the end of the year, which is going to be awesome. And in the middle, they got winnable games against Virginia Tech, Boston College, Cal, and UConn. So Syracuse is looking at a bowl season, I think, and Syracuse is looking at a season where it's enough in the ACC race that I think it's worth mentioning and paying attention to see how things unfold ahead of them, because they're kind of right there.
We will do this later this week when we preview Pitt Syracuse. I think the winner of Pitt Syracuse is absolutely squarely right at the top of the ACC race. We know what Miami and Clemson might be, but there was a graphic that I think was on the ACC network, and I saw some Pitt people talking about it on social media, and it was an SMU Clemson Miami graphic about the race for the ACC title. And it's just so freaking stupid. But like, also, what else would you expect? All the national networks who think that football only exists in the South. It's like, oh, watch out for SMU, watch out. But let's not talk about undefeated Pitt. Let's not talk about one loss Syracuse. It is so freaking stupid. So let's go, and I really hope for a high level game. I hope this is not Eli Holstein and Kyle McCord trading picks, right? Let's save the 7 turnover games for the SEC, not for Pitt Syracuse.
Yeah, should be a beautiful evening in Pittsburgh for some football.
Oh, come on, man. All right, quick break. When we come back, we'll take 17 seconds each to talk about the teams we have not yet discussed and the South Cram-o-Meter next on Kings of the North. Cram time. We were talking before the show about like getting ready for the show, and you said you were cramming before the show.
I was.
That just means we're getting ready for the show. So he was cramming, because then later he was going to be cramming. So how hard can the South cram it? By week, this is intended to be a 1 to 1,000 rating on how hard the South can cram it this week. We forgot to do it in week 1. Since then, week 2 was 815, week 3 was 975, week 4 was 910, week 5 was 1200. That's the first time we broke it. Week 6 was 1669. That's the second time we broke it. And last week it was 6,500,100 as our average. So it is obliterated. And yet, Bill, there has not been a week where we've had to scrape for cram talk. They constantly do this. And this week, what I'm particularly upset about is that the administration at Georgia, which just lets Kirby do whatever he wants to do, the AD and the president could not wait to get to social media to be outraged about Texas throwing cans on the field and that call getting overturned. Because what else will a university president have to talk about? But like I had the quote tweet fired up of like, hey, AD, nice. Well, how long was that statement? 2,000 words?
It was long. Yeah.
I think the Georgia AD paid for the extra stuff on Twitter just to write a 2,000-word statement. And then he did end it with, it just means more. I'm going to punch that. I can't say I'm going to punch that guy in the throat. Ha, ha, ha. I'm just kidding. I don't mean it. I just said something I don't mean. It's so freaking stupid. They're so self-righteous and obnoxious, and they were silent when their coach shoved the guy the week before. I think this is Texas's defense about the cans being thrown on the field. I think they should just say that the cans were shoved onto the field, and then the SEC and everybody would ignore it because shoving is allowed.
Oh, they
weren't thrown.
Idea. Yeah.
They were shoved.
They were accidentally shoved.
They were accidentally
You
shoved.
know how chaotic it is when you're in the stands at a college football game. You don't know what's happening in front of you. Sometimes you just accidentally shove an empty beer can onto the field. Yeah.
They were filled with a white hot rage. Hey, man, white hot rage. That's what they want in the SEC. Come on, brother. So I'm just so done with these blowhards, but I'll give it a 2,500, 2,500. You usually have a better reason for your number. Did you count the beer cans that were thrown on the field, and that's your number?
I didn't. It looks here like the salary of the president of the University of Georgia is $916,729. So that'll be my cram meter. I was actually ready to give a reasonable cram score of like somewhere in the 900s, but like less than 1,000 because Georgia won a big game, and we do have to acknowledge that result, as you said. And then the people in Athens opened their mouth again. So. We're over 900,000, 916,729. I won't add the cents.
Okay, I'll make sure I get that averaged for next week. But congratulations to the South for the cram meter coming down from last week, because it's not 6 million this week. So look at them getting themselves under control. Yeah. Also, congratulations to Texas for just like blowing it. That was the one team come on. We didn't give Texas any crap this year, did we?
None. We were very respectable of Texas. Yeah. And then Sark got put in a blender for 3.5 hours.
I mean, the Georgia defense played well. What were we going to say? The Georgia defense, I mean, they did play well, but I still have huge questions about the Georgia offense. So I'm sure I would expect a tweet from the Georgia president in the next 15 minutes on the fact that Bill gave a rating of 900,617. So I'm sure they'll be outraged. All right. That's enough for the cram meter. Let's move to our 2 loss teams. These teams are having pretty good seasons, starting with Colorado. 5-2. They scored touchdowns on their first 3 possessions against Arizona. Are they in the Big 12 title race? BYU and Iowa State are undefeated. Yes. Colorado, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and Cincinnati all have 1 loss in the conference. So there are 6 Big 12 teams as of right now who have 0 or 1 conference loss. They have Cincinnati this week, which is actually like a huge game.
It's like a Big 12 race elimination
at Colorado.
Game, right?
It is so, and who could care more about this than us? Like, it is an awesome game. I think it's another late night game. Then they're off, then at Texas Tech, then Utah, at Kansas, Oklahoma State. So like they don't play Iowa State, they don't play BYU, they don't play Kansas, and like they have chance. They've just lost to Kansas State by 3. So like they have chances here. Travis Hunter had been playing like 120 snaps each of the first 5 games. He hurt his shoulder, and they've dialed him back a little bit. So this past week, he played mostly offense. He played 41 snaps on offense and like 12 or 13 on defense. So he wound up with 53 snaps. They were so far ahead, they kind of eased him back in the second half. I think he aggravated it a little bit, but they were also being cautious. So he's not missing games, but he's not being Travis Hunter all the way. But I think they're being pretty smart and cautious with him, while I think trying to keep his Heisman hopes alive. But Arizona's still like Tetairoa McMillan. That's all anybody talked about at the beginning of the year. Oh, he's the best receiver in the country. 5 for 38. So whatever. I don't know. Like what it's like nothing. So Arizona stinks, but Colorado is for real at 5-2. And they have a chance to hang in this Big 12 race till the end of the year.
10-2 is there. Is it not? Like I don't want to put too much
win the
on
last 5?
Colorado, but like, yes, they're Cincinnati is their most difficult
team they have. Yeah.
And they get Cincinnati at home. I hope it should be a good atmosphere in Boulder. I think Colorado fans understand the magnitude of that game for the Big 12 race, right? I would think they do. Colorado has had really good home environments, I think, all year.
The Colorado Kansas State game was nuts.
Yeah,
that crowd was awesome.
I hope this is the same. It's a night game. And then like at Texas Tech, which like, yes, Colorado can lose that game, but I don't like, and then Utah, which is like its season is over. Kansas, I don't think is going to be all that much of a challenge, because I'll also be playing in that game in a half empty Arrowhead Stadium, and then Oklahoma State's terrible. So like I was optimistic that Colorado would have a nice step forward season. I was not necessarily anticipating they would be sitting here on October 21st asking realistically whether or not Colorado can finish 10-2.
And it's one of these things. At the beginning of the year, you would have said lose to Kansas, lose to Utah, because those teams were expected to be good, and those teams have had disappointing years. And now Colorado doesn't have games with some of the upstarts. So I'm not like exaggerating here. We'll talk about Cincinnati in a second. Colorado Cincinnati is gigantic.
It's a huge game.
It's a huge game.
Do we have that on the docket for a big game breakdown? Do we need to? We
might have to add it.
Plans?
Yeah, we have too many great games in the North. That is not. If we had a Southern show, we'd be like, "Oh, what do you want to talk about this week?" LSU, Texas A&M is this week. Get excited, everybody! God, Nebraska. What do you think of them? They have 2 losses.
They have 2 losses, but they did beat Colorado. That's a good win, right?
That's a great win. Yeah,
Nebraska fans are. I think they're at their wits' end a little bit after getting beat the way that Nebraska was just beat by Indiana, because Nebraska is in the second year of a Matt Rule rebuild that probably has not happened as expeditiously as Nebraska fans would have hoped. And here's Indiana in the first year of Kurt Cignetti barnstorming the country and kicking the crap out of everybody, including now Nebraska. I think maybe you can't take that result and like throw it aside because it was so lopsided and because of the circumstances both those programs found themselves in. I think maybe the larger issue, or at least part of that issue, is that Nebraska, like, since beating Colorado, has not really played good football.
Yeah.
With the exception of, I guess, like the second half against Purdue, and more specifically like the fourth quarter against Purdue, it has not strung together what I would consider an inspiring run. Like, it lost to Illinois. It had that weird game against Purdue. It beat Rutgers by a touchdown, but that game should have at least gone to overtime. And then it got its doors blown off by Indiana. So there was a lot of goodwill, and I think people feeling pretty good about where Nebraska was headed after that Colorado lost. And Matt Rule has just kind of lost all of it, I think. So they're in a tough spot.
Kurt Cignetti is going to make a lot of people mad this year. Why aren't we that? But we had Zach Carpenter on, great Nebraska writer, last week, and he and I agreed that this was a monumental game for Nebraska, and they didn't compete. Yeah. So we know it's on.
And now they're going to play Ohio State.
Like, it's, and we said the difference of Nebraska winning at Indiana going into Columbus versus Nebraska losing at Indiana going into Columbus. They're crawling into Columbus. They are limping into Columbus. They are being carried on a stretcher into Columbus at this point. So that's a 5-2 that feels much worse than that, I think, for Nebraska fans right now.
Yes.
Wisconsin, I think this is a 5-2 that feels better. Here's a stat for you. Last 3 weeks, Power 4 running backs, Tawi Walker from Wisconsin leads the nation in rushing. 418 yards the last 3 weeks, more than anybody. His first three games, I think he missed a game with injury. He was 38 carries for 137 yards, 3.6 yard average. The last 3 games, 66 carries, 418 yards, 6.3 yard average. And this will get you excited. These were how often Wisconsin dropped back to throw the ball in its first 5 games. 47% of the time, 43, 43, 50, and 43. The last 2 weeks, 38 and 39. So the last 2 weeks, they are back to 60% run. They are running it. Their offensive line looks good. They are asserting themselves, and I do think they are ready to be a problem. This is real, I think. I'm going to have to really get with Doug. I'm going to have to be backwards hat Doug and sports coat Doug and have the two of them sit down and talk about, could Wisconsin beat Penn State or Oregon before the end of the year? Because I think they're finding something. And I just want to say, where they were after losing to Alabama, and then they went out and were leading in the first half against USC and got their doors blown off in the second half, they were teetering. We were having fire the offensive coordinator conversations here. They were teetering. They had injuries, and they figured it out. And I do think this is a good coaching job by Luke Fickell.
I think it's a good coaching job by Luke Fickell. I do think that they are in don't get blown out by Penn State and Oregon territory, right? Like,
okay. The schedule also helped them.
Yeah, if you really want me to believe in this, I'm not saying you got to go spring an upset, but don't. Penn State and Oregon can't look like Alabama. And
have
then
a plan.
Yeah.
Have a plan. Look like you've brought a little something extra to the table, and then also execute what you're good at, which is running the ball with Tawi Walker right now. So like do that, and don't give up 60-yard bombs because you decided to have your backup nickel corner cover Ryan Williams, which is what they did against Alabama. And it was like, well, that wasn't good at all. So like, don't do the obvious silly things that take away your chance to compete. All right, Cincinnati, we talked about them a little bit, but here they are, Bill, 5-2, the Bearcats.
So I was going through my notes for the show. I'm looking at Cincinnati's schedule and I'm like, oh, they still have to play Colorado and Iowa State and Kansas State. They can really be a spoiler in the Big 12 race. And then I was like, well, no, if they win, they're going to go to the Big 12.
Win the Big 12. Yeah.
They're not merely a spoiler. They are super important to the Big 12 title race, both because they're still in it, but also because of who they play. You mentioned that Nebraska's a 5-2 that doesn't feel great, and Wisconsin's a 5-2 that probably feels better than I don't know how Cincinnati fans feel about their 5-2 because the two losses are by a combined 2 points to Pitt
4
in a
points.
game that Cincinnati.
It's 4 points.
4 points. Excuse me, 4 points to two teams that have a combined 2 losses. And Texas Tech just lost. So like both 2 games that Cincinnati probably should have won, right?
We're right there.
Yeah, so they're right there to win it. So they're on the cusp of being 7-0. I don't think that should take away from a really impressive 5-2.
Yes.
But I'd imagine there is a little bit of frustration there. Maybe by the end of the year, Cincinnati fans will be thinking like, man, I can't believe we lost those 2 games. But everything's in front of them. They have tremendous opportunity starting this week with Colorado. And I think it's great that they got Dante Corleone back at defensive tackle when it looked like maybe they won't have him. I think that defense is maybe starting to find a little something. And Brendan Sorsby has been everything they hoped he would be as a transfer quarterback from Indiana. He's making plays with his legs. He throws it really well. They're a better offense with him running the thing. So I view Cincinnati as very dangerous. I don't know that I'd pick them to spring the upsets in any of those 3 games, but I think they got a puncher's chance in all 3 of them.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Last group of teams is the 3-loss teams. We'll start with Michigan State. They are 4-3. They're on a bowl quest. They broke a 3-game losing streak with their really good win against Iowa on Saturday night. They get Michigan this week. That series is 6-6 since 2012, but Michigan won the last 2 games by a combined score of 78-7 because Michigan was really good and Michigan State was falling apart. Thanks to Mel Tucker's off the field stuff. I don't like. Is Michigan State going to go beat Michigan? Like they couldn't they? They have the better quarterback the way Aiden Childs played on Saturday.
This is I think a very uncomfortable spot for Sharon Moore, and I don't know that it is for Michigan State. Like I don't know. I get like Michigan State coming off of a game against the rivalry is so important, right? That you're coming off of a win, you're playing well, Michigan's not. Maybe there are pretty high expectations for the Spartans going into this one. But I think a loss here would be a whole lot more detrimental to Sharon Moore than it would be.
I agree.
Michigan State. Yeah.
I think Michigan State's still in house money territory. Like the Mel Tucker thing fell apart. They hired a pretty good established coach in Jonathan Smith who brought a quarterback with him. And they struggled early, but I think everything that's happening at Michigan State, all the bad stuff was reasonable. And the bad stuff at Michigan is also kind of reasonable, but the expectations are just higher. And so this game, Michigan is favored by 5.5 at home. We'll talk about it more later in the week, but I think it's a great opportunity for Michigan State. Like this would be a heck of a thing for Jonathan Smith in year 1 to win this rivalry game.
That game is in East Lansing, or is it in Ann
No,
Arbor?
it's at Michigan.
Okay.
In Ann Arbor. So yeah. Okay. We'll see. We shall see. Next one's up is Boston College. They get Louisville at home on Friday night. This is a 4-3 that I think could be better, right? They just had I watched that whole game on Thursday at Virginia Tech. Tommy Castellanos just had a couple like disastrous turnovers just on zone read, mishandling of the ball and stuff.
Yeah.
They got down 28-0 early, even though they were moving it, and then they stormed back, and then I think they were down 28-21, and they like turned it over again. They also gave up a gazillion rushing yards to that Virginia Tech back.
Right, but Buthel, yeah.
No offense to him. He I think he broke the Virginia Tech single game rushing record in that game. He ran all over Boston College. So Boston College shot itself in the foot, came back, and then couldn't stop the run. So it was just, I said going into that game, if Boston College wants to be something, if they want to be something more under Bill O'Brien, because what they've been for the past decade plus is a 6-win, make a small bowl team. and they could be more than that. And then in that game, they were not ready to be more than that. They didn't give themselves a chance to. And now Louisville's pretty good. Louisville's going to be mad. They just coming off a shootout against Miami that they could have won and didn't. It's another non-Saturday game. I think now Boston College is getting to the point of like they would take a 6-win season that gets them to a bowl. They just don't want to let this get away from them.
Yeah, Bashal Tootin is the running back. I was combining his first name and his last name. Yeah, he's a good running back. I'm a little
apparently in the portal. He transferred. When he transferred, he first committed to Boston College.
Yeah,
like 2 years ago, and then uncommitted and went to Virginia Tech, and then it was like that's the dude who dropped like 300 on him.
Yeah, and it's just like it doesn't make it any better that I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here. I'm just really surprised that we're at with Boston College's rushing attack and their running backs. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's not that I had like super lofty expectations for BC, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little disappointed with where they are right now.
Yeah, Minnesota. Also 4-3. What you got?
I think feeling pretty good about a 4-3, right? Like it initially was just Rhode Island and Nevada, but then you beat USC in an awesome game, and then you go on the road, and it wasn't the prettiest game in the world to beat UCLA, but you got the win. And like I did not have super high expectations for Minnesota. I think I was maybe under their win total projection. You were a little higher on it than I was.
Yep.
They're looking at a bowl season, I think, right? Maryland ahead at Illinois, at Rutgers. I think you can beat Maryland. I think you can beat Rutgers, given Rutgers' current status. Penn State's tough test, and at Wisconsin at the end of the year could be a tough test. But like these next 3 games are actually crucial for Minnesota to try to get to a bowl game with Maryland, at Illinois, and at Rutgers. Got to win 2 of those. And PJ Fleck is going bowling in like a bit of a retooling year, which I think would end up being a pretty good coaching job if they do that. So I think there's things to be excited about. I think when they lost their defensive coordinator, like at a really weird time to lose your defensive coordinator, I thought that could be real problems for Minnesota. And I actually think they've done a nice job defensively this year. And there's reasons to be excited about the offense with some of the skill guys. They got to figure out offensive line, and maybe they won't quite get that figured out enough to do anything more than merely make a bowl game. But I think it's been a nice season for Minnesota, given some of the like personnel limitations it has.
I think this is another team. I think this is a good 4-3. I think they're ascending. They're figuring stuff out. Yeah. They're fighting. They're winning games late. I think Max Brosmer has settled in. I think Darius Taylor and Daniel Jackson have settled in. I think the stuff you said about the defense is right. I think like they're headed in the right direction going into the second half of the year. Washington is coming off a bye. They had their best win of the season against Michigan, followed by their worst loss of the season against Iowa. And it's like, oh, Iowa's defense is really good. Then it's like Iowa went up to Michigan State and couldn't stop anybody. So this is a really hard team to figure out. This is one of these teams you keep talking about themselves, shooting themselves in the foot and that kind of thing. They don't, I think they only have 5 turnovers. Like they have not turned the ball over a ton, but the 2 things are they average 68 penalty yards per game. That's the 10th most in the Power 4. And they're 6 of 14 on 4th down, which is 105th in the nation in 4th down conversion rate. On one hand, they're probably exactly where they should be. On the other hand, they have Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon all left on their schedule. Like they better not trip up in their other games or they're not going to make it to a bowl. This is a rough kind of welcome to the Big Ten. But I think in totality, Bill, like watching them, knowing their players, I think they've been better than I thought. But I think they might wind up being one of these teams that they played better than I thought they would, but they wind up with the exact record I thought they would, which is like they're a 6-6 team that can be dangerous on the right day.
I don't know what to make of them because I think we've referenced this before. It's always a good thing to check out on Mondays after a college football weekend. J. Bud Davis on Twitter puts out his chart of EPA per play, offense, defense. Are you good offense, bad defense, whatever? You want to be in that upper right-hand quadrant, good offense, good defense. That's where Washington is. And Washington's logo is overlapping Georgia's. They're the same team statistically on like a down-to-down basis. And they're like clumped in a group with like Penn State and Alabama and Kansas State and Oregon and Indiana. And they're 4-3. I don't know what that tells me other than like maybe they're going to get somebody before the season ends.
Yeah.
Whether that's Indiana, Penn State, or Oregon.
Yeah. Also, maybe they just need to be in the SEC. They joined the wrong conference.
Maybe
they picked too difficult of a conference to join. Jed Fish is like, oh, we'd be the second best team in the SEC. What are we doing? So sorry you're in the North where it's too good. Michigan. This 4-3 is, not that we haven't talked about Michigan enough, but it is what it is, right?
It is what it is. Yeah, that's probably the best way to sum up Michigan season. Back to the quarterback drawing board, I think, for Sherrone Moore after Jack Tuttle. I threw it okay, but still they had too many turnovers, and that's what he's kind of hyper fixated on here. He was asked about reevaluating the quarterbacks after the game. He said, yes, you can't turn the ball over. You don't want to go to 4 quarterbacks. You don't want to have to go through this process, but you have to have a guy who is going to take care of the football. So we're going to see what we've got to do, and we'll have that conversation as we go. So I guess we're back on alert to see if Michigan starts a different guy at quarterback against Michigan State based off that answer. But
the only, I mean, are we on Jaden Davis true freshman alert, or do you feel like no?
I mean, he'd be I don't know if 4 quarterbacks mean a 4th different quarterback or starting a 4th, like having a 4th different starter, I guess, which like they could go back to Davis Warren or Alex Orji. So I don't know if we're on Jaden Davis watch or not. It'd be a heck of a thing to start him for the first time against Michigan State. Yeah, maybe Michigan would want to avoid that, but they're searching for answers and have not yet found them at the most important position. So
I lump these two teams together because they're so similar. Iowa also 4-3. They should at least get Sebastian Castro back this week. It sounds like he missed the Michigan State game. Their slot corner, they really missed him. They also missed 19 tackles against Michigan State, and they had missed 48 total in their previous 6 games. So they were missing like 8 a game, and then they missed 19. So this is one of those, we know the deal with the Iowa offense, but that's a pretty disappointing breakdown. We know they had injuries in the secondary, and that mattered, but that's not Iowa, brother.
It's not Iowa, which is why, like, I would be shocked really if that happened again. And I guess some of it is born out of injuries and guys that had to play in place of those injured players. But it doesn't really feel, if you're an Iowa opponent, I don't know that I'd bank on them missing that many tackles again.
Yeah.
But it does speak like Iowa has a pretty thin margin for error, and if you're going to miss tackles that way, I don't know that they're going to beat many teams they face either.
Kirk Ferentz said after the loss that he did not really consider a quarterback change to Brendan Sullivan after Cade McNamara struggled. You know, a lot of Iowa reporters that I respect are now saying like, hey, I think they should think about a quarterback change this week. Yeah. So we know how Kirk Ferentz is. He does not have a history of doing things quickly. But I don't know what else you want to see because, again, anybody who's watched Iowa knows they do it in the red zone sometimes. They were even surprised. They went for 2 and did not put Brendan Sullivan in for the 2-point play. They put Brendan Sullivan in when they want a quarterback run threat. And so I think they are there with this at the very least. Okay, like we can't throw it, but at least to get some people off of Caleb Johnson, their great running back, if we had a quarterback run threat, that would be something. So I don't know. But it's Kirk Ferentz. You don't hold your breath. But they also have Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland for the next month before the Black Friday with Nebraska. Like they're 4-3. They still have a chance at a pretty good 8 or 9 win season if they get some of this stuff figured out. Yeah. Rutgers, what do you got for Rutgers?
I mean, the defensive injuries we've talked about all along. They're 4-3. They're 1-3 in the Big Ten. They got to play at USC on Friday night. It's an 11 p.m. kickoff. Huge LA New York sports weekend. Game 1 of the World Series leading right into Rutgers USC. What more could you ask for? They're just not they're not built to sustain this. And Greg Schiano was talking a little bit about after the game they lost to UCLA. They're out without Mohamed Toure for the season. Both starting defensive ends missed the game. They did get Tyreen Powell, linebacker Flip Dixon, safety, and cornerback Robert Longerbeam back to play in that game, but he said like those guys didn't practice, so he felt like that kind of showed up too. Like they, similar to Iowa, they didn't tackle well. Greg Schiano in his post game press conference made the point that according to people who like track such things, the 2 best tackling teams in college football last year were Michigan and Rutgers, and then Rutgers went out and missed a bunch of tackles against UCLA. UCLA had over 200 yards after the catch in that game, and it just becomes especially frustrating because Rutgers really moved the ball well offensively. It scored 32 points. It averaged 7 yards per play, which without looking, I'd have to imagine is one of the better yards per play metrics Rutgers has had against a power opponent since it became a power school. And they lost because their defense couldn't get off the field and they couldn't stop anybody. So people are frustrated. We've tried to offer the context of like defensive injuries and having to overcome that, but this was a season where people were talking about Rutgers as like a playoff dark horse, and Rutgers winning between 8 to 10 games, and they're sitting at 4 wins. Still winnable games left at USC, Minnesota, at Maryland, Illinois, and at Michigan State. Like a bowl game is possible, but I also don't think it's guaranteed against that schedule with some of the injuries that Rutgers has. So we'll see where it goes.
Last one is Maryland at 4-3. A lot of talk in the offseason, but like, hey, the death of the Big Ten East. Finally, Maryland doesn't have to play Ohio State, Michigan every year. It's like, oh, they don't have to play Michigan this year. They have road trips to Oregon and Penn State left. So it's like, raise your hand if you still have to play 2 top 3 teams on the road the rest of the year. But they beat USC. And again, I just like have a lot of respect for Mike Locksley, the head coach right now. This was, if you didn't watch the end of the first half of the Maryland USC game, USC scored, they kicked off, and they got an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on the kickoff because USC doesn't have a coach. I can't remember who their coach is. They play like they don't have a coach. So Maryland got the ball at the 40 with like 25 seconds left and had 2 really nice, like 15-yard completions to get down to the 27-yard line. And they did not spike it. They decided like the clock got stopped for a first down with like 10 seconds left. And so they just like hurried up and they snapped it with 9 seconds left, and they snapped it over the quarterback's head. And like maybe Billy Edwards Jr. could have caught it, but it wasn't a great snap. It got past him and USC recovered it. And the announcer on the game, I don't know who it was, shouted, "Oh no, disaster. What a bad idea." And I was just like, I want this guy to announce SEC games. My God, that guy would have had a field day for Tennessee, Alabama. So Mike Locksley was asked after the game about fans leaving, and he cited that play because that's how the first half ended. And he said, I mean, I would have left too, probably. So they went from fans leaving at halftime to storming the field at the end of the game. And it is just like Mike Locksley is just like, listen, man, like, trust me on this. I've got the support. Obviously, my boss understands what we're doing, and not everybody understands what we're doing and what we're building. And everybody's transactional. It's disappointing that every week you've got to come up here and defend yourself and defend your team. But understand this, we've got a good team recruited. If our fan base and our supporters can't understand it, we're really, really close. And now ain't the time to jump off. Now's the time to double down on Maryland football. And when you're kicking Lincoln Riley to the curb, you get to say that kind of stuff. So congrats to Maryland. That's a nice 4-3, right? I thought they were going to be horrible this year. That's a nice 4-3.
It's not a bad 4-3. The USC win makes it's not bad. That announcer, by the way, Eric Collins, he's a play-by-play guy for the Charlotte Hornets. He is from Cleveland, and he's a Syracuse grad.
Oh, let's get that guy. He's of the North. Let's get that guy in the show. Disaster. It's like, I mean, it was true, but like they came back from it. Disaster. Yeah. Oh no. All right, that's it. Disaster. We went 22 minutes long. Oh no. Sorry. Too much ball, Landis. We have too many on the team. If we were doing a Southern show, it's like, let's talk about the undefeated teams. It's Miami and Liberty. That's like a 4-minute segment.
Yeah.
It's a 4-minute segment. Too much good Northern ball. We won't apologize for it. Tuesday, I don't even know what we're going to do. We're definitely going to talk about Michigan and Alabama in context with each other with Dan Wetzel. I got some other stuff planned. Wednesday, we'll do a big game breakdown on Pitt Syracuse. We'll do some playoff predictions. We're going to talk about Boise State UNLV this week. That's a Friday night game that might be for the G5 playoff spot, and Boise is of the North. And then Landis on Thursday, as you said, we have so many good games. We're going to have multiple big game breakdowns.
Yeah, we might have like 6, which I think is the most we've done. So a lot of prep work, a lot of cramming before then.
We only go over if you think about this as a 90-minute show. If you think of it as a 2-hour show, which I kind of do, then we're constantly under. It's just about parameters.
That's the trick. We told you it was a 90-minute show. Because we know you'd think of it as a 2-hour show.
So I'm going to do the reverse Mr. Rogers. I'm going to get my jacket on to end the show because I'm a professional. And I apologize if I smoke too many cigarettes and wave too many swords on Saturdays, but Monday is a professional football day. Great Northern Ball ahead. Thanks to everybody for being here. Subscribe, give us a thumb, tell a friend. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yorostowski, for making us look good and sound good. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And this very professional college football show was Kings of the North.